You know, some nights the scent of lilacs rides in on the heating vent here at Maple Haven, and quicker than a June grasshopper I'm whisked clean back to Mama's porch, swinging 41. When Papa still whistled Bing Crosby through cracked screen doors and the summer air tasted like lemonade and shoe polish. Tonight that same shy smell curled under my nose while the ward lights clipped off, and it set my mind humming on something that just won't let me rest. I'm Millie, Mildred Louise Sutton if you're grading papers, but Millie to every child I ever taught and every soldier I ever patched up. 86 years and counting, honey, and I've worn holes clear through 2 pairs of war issue boots, 3 husbands' patience, and more flannel than a Kansas harvest fair. Yet none of that phrased me like what's tugging at my sleeve tonight. Because here in 2021, in a tidy little hospice that pretends to smell of lavender, but foolin' no one, a notion keeps whisper tapping at the back door of my thoughts. Someone's been dosing my evening cocoa with more than marshmallows. I can feel it in the prickle behind my ears and the copper twang on my tongue, same as the day field medics slipped the wrong vial into a GI's 4 and near sent him home under a flag. Now, sugar, scoot your chair a mite closer. This isn't your run-of-the-mill bedtime recollection. No, sir. It's the kind that rattles the doorknobs of a woman's courage and reminds her that memory is sharper than any scalpel in the drawer. Soft laugh, gentle pause, oh, and sweet pea right about now. If my yarns already tickled your curiosity, tap that little thumbs up or jot a howdy, Millie down below. It lets this old gal know I'm not John into the cornfield. Bless your heart. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, the night breeze, the lilacs, and the way a simple smell can peel back the years like pages in a Sears catalog. See, earlier this evening Nurse Alice, the new one with eyes as gray as a February pond, floated in all shoes and whispers, switched my pills with the hush of a church mouse, and left a tumbler whose surface quivered just a tad too pink. I may be slow, but I'm not soft in the head. Lord left me this sharp mind for a reason, and by glory I'm going to use it. When that first swallow burned like turpentine, an old battlefield reflex flicked awake. Pay attention, Millie. Catalog every detail before the fog sets in. So I did what any stubborn prairie woman would. I pressed record on that hand-me-down Sony the grandkids gave me, so your stories don't get lost, Grandma, and I tucked it deep under the quilt, red light blinking like Rudolph on Christmas Eve. What happened next, friend, is stitched tight to my ribs, and before this night is over I'll unpick the seams for you thread by thread, because some truths are too heavy to tote alone, and I figure you've got strong shoulders. But first you need to understand why this tale still trembles in my teacup. It isn't just a scrap of old lady gossip. It's a living warning label pasted right over life's final doorway. So stay with me, will you? Lean in close. Listen for the creak of the rocking chair and the steady blip of my heart monitor, because before the moon slides past that water tower outside, I'll show you how a tired schoolmarm used nothing but grit, memory, and a $5 cassette to turn the tables on death in a starched uniform. Tell me, neighbor, when the person hired to ease your journey tries instead to hurry the ticket, what would you do? Think on that, leave me your answer, and meet me in Chapter 2, if you've got the backbone for the rest. Well now, scoot a little closer and mind the squeak of this old rocker, 'cause I'm fixin' to crack open the cedar chest of my childhood, and the cedar's smell alone might make your eyes mist over like mine do every darn time. Picture the year 1941. Long before Maple Haven or Nurse Alice or even the word hospice had crept into my vocabulary, and set your sights on a dusty stretch of prairie just outside Hutchinson where wheat fields rolled like honey-colored waves clear to the edge of God's own horizon. That's where I was plain little Millie May back then, pig-tailed, sun-freckled, and perched barefoot on the split-rail fence outside Daddy's shop, clutching a peach so ripe it dribbled down my wrist while I hollered hello to every Santa Fe locomotive barreling past. Our clapboard farmhouse sat stubborn as a mule against the hot south wind, paint peeling in strips, porch swing groaning sweet lullabies each evening, and if you'd peeked in the kitchen, you'd likely find Mama humming. Sentimental journey while hoisting jars of chow chow onto the windowsill, her apron pockets bulging with clothespins and peppermint drops. Saturdays smelled of coal smoke and green apples, because that was market day. Daddy hitching the horse, Mama packing pies, me skipping circles around the wagon wheels, sure in my bones that the dusty main street of Hutchinson, with its 5 and dime, its barber twirling a red and white pole, and its courthouse clock solemnly chiming noon, was the bustling center of the grand wide world. I believed anything was possible there, especially after I watched old Doc Boone set a broken colt's leg with hands steady as a church pew. Mercy me, the way he nodded at me afterward lit a spark I've carried ever since. From that morning on I'd lay awake on summer nights listening to cicadas and dreaming that I, Millie Sutton, might someday tug on a crisp white nurse's cap and patch up hurt folks the way Doc patched that filly. Of course life wasn't all lemonade and moon pies. The depression still nipped at our heels, money thinner than Mama's Sunday gravy, and storms rolled in blacker than barn soot. But neighbor helped neighbor then. Miss Clara would send over molasses bread when Daddy's cough got bad, and we kids hauled buckets of well water clear across the field when the Johnson's pump gave out. Those small mercies stitched my faith together tighter than any sermon, and I grew up trusting that kindness, like wheat seed, always sprouts back up if you plant enough of it. I remember my very first heartbreak, 11 years old, standing by the radio. The morning news crackled that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Daddy's hand slid over mine, calloused and trembling, and right then I pledged, without speaking a word, that when I was grown I'd follow our boys wherever they went and keep them breathing come what may. That vow carried me all the way to a muddy field hospital in Korea, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in 41, the biggest drama was learning to sew a straight hem and sneaking spoonfuls of Mama's vanilla custard before the church bake sale. I believed, honest to goodness, that people who did wrong eventually faced daylight and righted themselves, 'cause Granny Pearl used to say, "Child, the Lord's a patient bookkeeper." I clung to that notion clear through war, widowhood, and classrooms full of rambunctious 8th graders. But here's the rub, darling. When a woman who's spent her whole life mending others suddenly suspects someone's trying to unpick her own seams, well, that shakes a body different. Still, the memory of that bright Kansas childhood, locust song, screen door slam, Daddy's whistle, gives me the backbone I need to lean into this tussle now. Recorder humming under my pillow and truth itching to be told. So as you let those prairie pictures settle in your mind, ask yourself, if your earliest lessons were that goodness always circles back, what would it do to your heart to find wickedness waiting at the curve? Well now, let me draw you straight back to the breath when the rails outside Hutchinson kicked my whole future clean off its proper track. It was a Saturday in late April of 43, tulips poking up like bashful choir girls along the courthouse walk, and I, 17, skinny as a fence slat, had just traded 4 hen-fresh eggs for a spool of darning cotton at the Ben Franklin. The noon whistle was still fading when a Santa Fe troop train groaned to an unplanned halt at the siding. Boxcars clanged, steam hissed, and out the open door of a medical coach lurched a young private, jacket half-buttoned, face gray as yesterday's ashes. Folks on Main just gawked, but something hot and certain lit beneath my breastbone. Before I knew it, my sneakers were slapping gravel, carrying me toward him the way iron flies to a magnet. Close up, I saw the red bloom through his torn trouser leg and smelled iodine fighting sweat. Remember, sugar, penicillin was still rationed, and a working nurse was rarer than nickel coffee. Sir, you need to sit. That's all I managed, voice quivery as pie crust. Yet he obeyed like I'd outranked every officer on board. I ripped my brand new cotton off the spool, tied a makeshift pressure bandage, then fetched water from the depot pump while the conductor hollered for the town doctor. The soldier's name was Daniel Avery, Oklahoma farm boy, eyes the color of a brewing storm. When the bleeding eased, he fixed on me with a look that made the depot sign and the whole blue sky blur away. Miss, he whispered, you saved my hide. What's your name so I can write it on the good side of luck? My heart thudded reckless, and for a beat I couldn't remember my own Christian name. Finally I squeaked, Millie Sutton. Just then the locomotive hissed like a kettle ready to blow, orders came down to rehook the cars, and Doc Hilliard arrived puffing too late to be helpful. They boosted Dan back aboard, but before the door slammed he pressed my bloody spool into my palm and said, "Hold this for when we meet again." The train pulled away, wheels clacking a rhythm I would hum for months after, ka-chunk, each feat spelling you can do more. That night, porch swing creaking under a honey orange sunset, my pulse still raced fast as a jackrabbit. Why had the train stopped in our dusty town? Why had no medic stepped down first? Bigger still, why did my chest ache with fierce, unstoppable purpose? I opened my geography primer and scribbled on the flyleaf, field dressings, pulse points, Army Nurse Corps, each note glowing like a road flare. 2 weeks later a thin envelope arrived, edges grimy with railway soot. Inside lay a pressed violet and shaky words, "To the prairie angel who patched me up, thank you." If you ever wonder whether a single mercy matters, it does. I read that line 12 times, each pass fanning the spark until it roared. By kerosene lamp I filled out enlistment forms, hand trembling, but steady enough. When Mama caught me sealing the envelope at dawn, I braced for scolding. Instead, she cupped my cheek and said, "Child, when the Lord hollers your name, you'd best answer before the echo fades." Daddy just nodded, eyes shining the way we does before stormlight, and handed me Granny's travel Bible for luck. I couldn't explain, not even to myself, why my heartbeat whooshed louder picturing antiseptic corridors than bridal aisles, but I knew the pins of my life had spun onto a brand new map. Looking back now, curled under hospice quilts with machines humming lullabies, I see how that unscheduled train delivered every chapter after Korea's mud, chalk dust classrooms, even this recorder blinking beside me because one stranger's wound called out. And I answered, "Tell me, friend, if destiny limped off a boxcar and bled on your shoes, would you back away or roll up your sleeves?" Well, child, hitch up your patience, 'cause this part of the quilt stitched with knots, and every knot hurt going in. The Army shipped me out on a drizzly March dawn of 45, Kansas mud clinging to my regulation heels, and the whistle goodbye still echoes in the chambers of my heart even now. 12 days of pitching gray water across the Pacific later, I stepped onto Busan Pier and straight into a furnace of noise, ambulance bells, artillery rumbles far off, and 1,000 voices pleading in languages I didn't yet know. Nothing in Mama's hymnal had prepared me for that concerto of pain. First morning in the field hospital, I was handed a bone-dull scalpel, a cot-side chart, and a polite warning from Captain Hardwick, "Miss Sutton, we're short on everything but winded boys. Pace yourself or you'll drop." Mercy me, he might as well have told wheat to stop growing. Supplies ran thinner than ice in July, chlorine tablets worth their weight in pearls, and there I was, brand spanking new, trying to suture shattered flesh while mortar dust drifted like chalk over the tents. The external conflict, as folks call it in fancy books, came stomping in with the 7th Infantry, double columns of stretchers, some breathing, some done breathing, and Hardwick barking for triage faster than a rooster at sunup, but the second battle brewed quiet inside my own chest. Each time I pressed gauze over a stranger's heartbeat, I wondered whether Daniel Avery might be somewhere in that river of stretchers, and the wondering made my hands shake just enough to shame me. Couldn't let the doctors see, so I started biting the inside of my cheek. Drew blood to study blood, if that makes a lick of sense. Telling myself, Millie May, these men don't need your tears. They need your skill. Truth is, part of me wanted to climb the next cargo plane home and hide behind the Hutchinson Water Tower till the war blew over. But another part, an ornery, prairie-bred stub of will, dug its boots deeper, muttering, that dog won't hunt. Girl, you chose this road, now march it. Support came in odd places. Sister Benedicta, a wiry nun in combat boots, slipped peppermint oil onto my kerchief so the sickroom stench wouldn't swamp me. She'd tap my wrist mid-shift and whisper, steady, daughter, the Lord's counting on our small braveries. Still, not everyone clapped my shoulder. One surgeon, Colonel Maddox, carried a chip bigger than his scalpel and declared women emotional liabilities. He once slapped a tray from my hands when a shell thumped nearby, glass flying like fireflies, and the humiliation burned hotter than the shrapnel we tweezed from flesh. That night, by lantern glow, I scribbled in my pocket journal, couldn't send such thoughts home, would have worried Mama Raw. I fear I'm cracked china in a world of iron pots. What? If kindness isn't enough armor, then I tucked the page deep where no eyes but mine could nose around. Things sharpened when the 38th Parallel Offensive surged. We worked 36 hours without relief, our ward a chorus of groans and code numbers, and halfway through I discovered Private Lewis, barely 18, clutching a crumpled photo of a bird dog. He begged me to hold it so it wouldn't get bloody, and when I promised, his lips stilled mid-thank you. I swear the grief rose in me like floodwater, but the ward needed legs, not puddles, so I swallowed the sob, pinned the picture safe in my breast pocket, and plunged on. That moment carved a dilemma I've wrestled ever since. How to keep a tender heart beating while wading through rivers that threaten to drown it. See, war didn't just break bodies, it bent my belief that goodness always boomerangs back. And every new dawn forced me to choose between staying soft-spoken Millie or welding on a shell so thick no prayer could pierce it. I chose a shaky middle, patch who I could, pray for who I couldn't, and jot every mercy in that journal like breadcrumbs for the day I'd need to find my way home. Tell me true, friend, if holding onto compassion felt like grabbing barbed wire, would you loosen your grip or bleed a little longer? There came a night in '52 when the whole blasted war funneled down to the length of one cot, and every tick of my pocket watch, normally steady as a metronome, seemed to hang motionless in the damp jungle air. We'd shifted our aid station up a rugged hill near the engine, supplies lower than a cellar after tornado season, and the moon glared like a bare bulb over a scene I still taste when morphine makes my mouth dry. Sirens whined, diesel fumes clung, and stretcher after stretcher poured in until the canvas floor felt alive with groans. I was threading a needle for a chest wound when Corporal Jimenez burst through the flap, shouting for transfusion bags we didn't have. And right behind him 4 orderlies lugged a body swaddled so tight in field blankets I couldn't see a face. They set him down, and a dog tag swung free. Avery D. Time froze, I swear it froze, like snow globe glitter caught mid-swirl. The same boy whose violet eyed pressed into my journal lay there gray-lipped, pulse a ghost. Everything inside me slammed into a wall of panic, and for a gilded instant I considered sprinting out, pretending I'd never seen, but duty yanked my boots back to the dirt. I ripped the blankets down, shrapnel in the abdomen, frothy breaths, eyes fluttering, and my mind screamed measurements, dosages, protocols, Yet my fingers fumbled, like they'd forgotten their own bones. Captain Hardwick shouted to Pick, who got the last plasma bottle, Daniel or a 16-year-old radio boy spurting bright arterial red 2 cots over. That was the choice. The farm kid who'd ignited my calling or a child too young to shave. Something inside me split clean through. I remember the kerosene lantern sputtering and the second hand of my watch jerking, then stopping dead at 2:17, as if heaven itself refused to record what came next. I turned, slow as waiting syrup, pressed the plasma to the radio boy's arm, and felt Daniel's gaze latch on me like a fishhook. He managed one whisper, "It's okay, Angel," and I swear I heard we rustling back home. One last Kansas freeze. 5 minutes later, though the watch still swore I was 2:17, his chest fell quiet. I stitched and bandaged through a veil of roaring silence, my heart slugging lead. When the rush finally ebbed, I slipped his dog tag into my pocket along with that faded violet, both sticky with sweat, and walked out behind the mess tent, where I threw up into the dark until nothing but dust and prayers came out. Right then, I understood, for the first, fiercest time, that mercy sometimes means letting go of one's soul to save another. And that God doesn't always issue receipts for the bargains we strike. I lost more than Daniel that night. I buried the last scrap of girlish certainty that goodness was tidy, that every debt balanced before sunrise. In its place grew something harder, crooked maybe, but unbreakable. The conviction that remembering, honestly, painfully, down to each dropped heartbeat, is the only justice we mortals can promise the dead. That belief carried me through 2 more years of blood and chalkboard decades after. And it's why this recorder hums beneath my pillow tonight. So, neighbor, tell me straight, if time paused on the worst decision of your life, would you dare start it ticking again knowing which heartbeat you'd counted out? Well now, sugar, when the artillery finally quit its angry grumble and the medevac birds flapped away like worn-out crows, a hush seeped into my bones heavier than any blast. I signed the ceasefire log inside a tent that smelled of carbolic, diesel, and plain old surrender, folding dressings while the papers rustled across distant desks. Yet inside me there was no trumpet, no confetti, only the hollow where Daniel Avery's last breath still drifted like wine through an empty silo. July heat greeted me at the Hutchinson Depot, wheat shining, flags waving, but the noise bounced off a shell I hadn't meant to grow. Mama served peach pie and neighbors clapped my shoulders. I smiled, said much obliged, then lay awake that night listening for sirens that never came. The school board offered me a biology classroom, and I grabbed it because chalk dust felt safer than blood. Still, every frog we dissected carried the smell of iodine, and when a scalpel flashed, I saw Captain Hardwick's frantic eyes. My 8th graders never guessed. They just copied diagrams and giggled when the chalk screeched while I pressed nails into my palm until the picture blurred. Evenings I graded papers beneath jittery tubes, letting the hum drown ghosts. Some nights I starched my nurse's cup, set it on the dresser, and whispered, "Tomorrow I'll be brave again," though I wasn't sure what brave meant anymore. Friends tried pairing me with respectable fellows, the feed store manager, a widowed pharmacist, a highway patrolman who danced like corn in wind. I drank punch, chatted polite, then slipped out before the slow song, their talk of drive-ins and shiny Chevrolets sounding paper-thin against stretcher canvas in my head. One bitter January, I almost said yes to the pharmacist, thinking a life of counting pills might dull the past, but when he reached for my glove I flinched, seeing surgical forceps instead of fingers, and trudged home through snow so bright it hurt, whispering apology to nobody at all. Slowly, though, the world kept nudging. Spring of '57, a freckle-faced student named Clara brought me a baby robin swaddled in her arithmetic test. We fed the mite with an eyedropper until its wings found muscle, and the morning it lifted off across the playground, my ribs loosened a notch, as if a window finally cracked in a locked house. Healing, I discovered, isn't fireworks. It's tiny stitches pulled day after plain day until one dawn you notice the seam no longer tugs. By 60, I had bought a 2-room bungalow and started collecting Christmas ornaments, glass globes catching light the way hope catches breath. Each December I hung them while whispering names of boys who never made it home, letting the tinsel sing for them. Parades still churned my stomach, yet I could hum carols again without tears. My faith grew low and knobby like creekside roots, no lofty hosannas, just a quiet thank you, Lord, for sunrise coffee, robin wings, and the chance, even broken, to keep tending life wherever I found it. I planted a small backyard garden because pushing seeds into Kansas dirt felt like prayer. Tomatoes climbed stakes, beans twined stubborn, and dusk insects sang reassurance that storms pass. Letters from former students, degrees, wedding snapshots, tiny thank yous filled a biscuit tin I labeled proof for lonely evenings. Over time, those envelopes silenced the question that rattled my brain at 3 a.m., whether mercy ever mattered. One crisp autumn dawn, I realized I'd gone an hour without hearing ward monitors in my head, and I said, half laughing, "Look at you, Millie, breathing like ordinary folks again." Well, now, I'd just turned 68, arthritis nipping at my knuckles, and the chalk tray finally surrendered to a younger gal, when a padded envelope the color of sunrise plopped onto my porch rocker like it had walked there itself. Return label read Avery, Oklahoma City. Mercy me, that name still rang my ribs like a church bell, and inside lay a photo of 2 bright-eyed children holding up a science fair ribbon, plus a note in neat crayon. Dear Miss Millie, Grandpa Dan told us you're the reason he ever came home at all. We won first place with our model heart. Could you visit our school and tell the story? Now, I'd spent decades stuffing that battlefield into a drawer marked hush, but those little faces tugged the latch clean off. Next Thursday, I buttoned my best lilac suit, prayed my knees wouldn't creak too loud, and boarded a Greyhound West with a Tupperware of snickerdoodles balanced on my lap. When I stepped into their classroom, walls plastered with planets and glued bean art, the kids gasped like a movie reel had sprung to life. I laid Daniel's dog tag on the desk, passed around my stethoscope, and spoke slow, pausing whenever noses scrunched or hearts thudded behind overalls. Somewhere between explaining plasma bottles and robin fledglings, I felt a soft fizz inside, like soda waking on the tongue, realizing my old sorrow could fertilize fresh wonder instead of choking it. On the ride home, sunset washing the wheat bronze, a thought bonnet my mind. Stories are tourniquets for the spirit. They stop quiet bleedings we don't even notice. Couple weeks later, my grand-girl Penny drove up in her tiny red hatchback, hair pink as county fair cotton candy, and declared, "Gammy, TikTok's cute, but you need a real recorder, legacy in high definition." She pressed a shiny silver Sony into my palms, microphone no bigger than a lima bean. "Just talk," she said. "We'll save every word in the clouds so no tornado can scatter 'em." I laughed. Lord knows Kansas eats backups for breakfast, but that night, house dim except for the blue blank of the router, I clicked rec and let the silence between heartbeats spill into sound. Daniel's violet, Mama's chow chow jars, the radio boy's dog photo, each memory uncreasing like bed-pressed linen. When I played it back, my own voice, wobbly, weathered, still standing, filled the room warmer than any furnace. That recorder turned into a lantern I could carry down hallways long closed, lighting corners so dusty even grief forgot their address. Hope sprouted practical shoots, too. I started volunteering Tuesday mornings at Maple Haven, wheeling domino tables onto the veranda, slipping peppermint oil onto pillowcases the way Sister Benedicta once did for me. Folks said I brought pep to the place. Truth is, every thank you stitched another inch of my ragged faith. One gusty spring afternoon, a resident named Mr. Collins, park ranger by trade, told me, voice shakier than aspen leaves, that the night nurse sometimes mixed up his meds. I felt a prickle, cold as creek water, race my spine, yet instead of shutting the drawer again, I nodded slow, touched his sleeve, and thought of the Sony flashing red in my purse. All right then, Millie May, I told myself. Looks like the Lord circled you back into service. That single decision, no fanfare, just a quiet click of resolve, pushed my story onto the track that leads us to the very recording you're hearing now. Funny, isn't it? After all the bang and bluster of war, it was a crayon letter and a pocket-sized gadget that nudged my compass true north again. So I ask you, neighbor, if a small voice, child, grandchild, stranger, handed you the key to unlock your buried courage, would you pocket it for later or turn the lock today? Well now, this evening the wind is sliding through the pines like a hymn half remembered, and I reckon it's high time I loosen the last knot I've kept cinched behind my breastbone. You see, sweetheart, for 73 stubborn years I carried Daniel Avery's dog tag in the same pocket as the violet he once pressed into my palm. And every time the metal clanked, I heard the minute hand of that stalled watch at 2:17 scraping against memory. I told myself I kept it to honor him, but the plain truth is that tag was my own private shackle, proof I still believed the Lord had scored me guilty for choosing the radio boy that night. I never breathed that shame to a living soul, not Mama, not the students who thought bravery smelled like chalk, not even to this midnight Sony, because a schoolmarm's voice is supposed to soothe, not tremble. Yet yesterday, somewhere between the afternoon domino game and the clang of the supper cart, I saw a sharper truth. Nurse Ellis isn't the first ghost hovering at my bedside. Guilt has been ladling something bitter into my cocoa for decades, and I've swallowed every sip without a whimper. Well, child, no more. After lights out, I wheeled myself into the courtyard, moonbright as fresh laundry, and dug a small trench under the lilac bush that perfumes room 12 each May. Hands shaky but steady enough, I laid the dog tag and that paper-thin violet in the cool dirt, whispered a psalm of thanks for the men who came home, and the men who didn't, then tucked the past beneath Kansas loam. The tag chimed once against the trowel, so soft you'd miss it if your heart wasn't listening, and I swear my ribs opened wide like barn doors, taking a welcome breeze. I rolled back inside smelling of lilac and earth, sat before this recorder, and hit rec without scrubbing the soil from under my nails, because I want the scratch of dirt to remind me that mercy planted is mercy able to sprout. So here's my hard-won confession. I made a choice in war that cracked me open, but the cracking let daylight through seems tougher than dandelion roots, and daylight is meant to be shared. I forgive the frantic girl I was, and I forgive the tired woman who spent half a lifetime hiding her. I even forgive Colonel Maddox for slapping that tray, because his harshness taught me the weight of gentle hands. As for Nurse Ellis, the law will tally her counts. My calling is simply to speak the story true and trust that truth, once aired, will find its own legs. From this hour on I choose to live forward, not backward, no rehearse, no regret, just the steady, ordinary business of being present until the monitor hum turns into choir music. Tomorrow I'll ask Jenny, the activities aide, to wheel me down to the craft room so I can teach the great-grandkids how to blow eggs for Easter ornaments. That small sharing will be my pledge that living outranks lamenting. Sugar, if my voice reaches your earbuds, know this. A burden spoken becomes a bridge, and crossing it takes only one honest footstep. So tell me, what relic of regret rattles in your pocket tonight? And are you brave enough to lay it down before the clock strikes another silent 2:17? I'll keep the seat warm for folks to swap their secret for a cup of cocoa, because shared sorrow cools faster than pain alone. And remember, worn bodies lean toward tomorrow in a grin. Well now, sweetheart, when I set the two reels of my story side by side, the bright crackling first act where I thought kindness was a boomerang that always came sailing home, and this quieter reel we're spinning tonight, I see how time sanded my certainties down to something pocket smooth and serviceable, like a river pebble you turn between your fingers when the doctor's needle hovers. Back then I believed life followed a fair merit ledger. Patch enough knees, send enough casseroles, and Providence would mark you paid in full. Yet battle wards and hospice always taught me a humbler arithmetic. Goodness is seed, not currency, and you scatter it because soil is everywhere, not because you expect a receipt in tomorrow's mailbox. I used to measure courage by volume, the louder the vow, the braver the soul, but I've learned the truest grit is often a whisper under a quilt at 3 a.m., saying I'll open my eyes anyway, and some mornings that's sermon enough. Years ago I craved tidy endings, reads on white doors, medals pinned straight at graduation angle, but these days I bless the ragged seams where light sneaks in, because seams mean a thing was torn and mended instead of thrown away. If grief drilled one lesson deep, it's that memory, when shared, turns from weight to bridge. Look at us right now, trading breath across a wire no thicker than a hair, and somehow my long ago midnight choice is easing a burden you might not have dared name out loud before. Another truth: forgiveness isn't a stamp of approval, darlin'. It's a way of unclenching your own fist so life can tuck fresh moments there. Like Penny's cotton candy hair or Mr. Collins's shaky domino grin, moments that would slide right past if your knuckles stayed white. And mercy me, I've discovered hope is less a firework and more a pilot light. Tiny, steady, invaluable when the frost hits. Keep it sheltered. And you can warm a whole roomful of strangers' cocoa slow. So how can any of this old woman musing help a soul on the other end of the internet who's juggling car payments, deadlines, and a world that hums too fast to hear itself think? Maybe just this: if a story like mine, stitched with lilac breezes, battlefield mud, chalk dust, and a pocket recorder, can loop back to usefulness at 86, then your own misstamped chapters aren't wasted ink either. Tuck them in your coat, pass them to a child, plant them under a lilac, or press record for some future listener hungry for proof that broken people still hum. But for land's sake, don't lock them away, because silence ferments into something sour while a spoken sorrow turns compost rich, ready to feed the next brave seed. So pour a cup, take one honest look at whatever daub tag of regret rattles your pocket, and ask yourself the question I finally quit dodging. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting for a perfect day, a perfect apology, a perfect you, and simply laid that weight down so both hands are free to scatter a little goodness before the porch light flicks off. What say you, neighbor? Will you risk it? Well now, sweet pea, if you've rocked beside me this far, let me lay my hand gentle on yours and breathe the last of this tale straight into your good ear, because a story, once fully told, turns into a living lantern we can pass from palm to palm long after porch lights have winked out. See, all those lilac breezes and ambulance sirens, those school bells and midnight record clicks, they wasn't only stepping stones back there on the dusty path behind us. They're breadcrumbs leading right up to the threshold of your tomorrow, and tomorrow is hungry for whatever wisdom we dare scatter in its lunch pail. So lean in, neighbor, feel the hum of my heart monitor keeping ragtime tempo with the crickets outside Maple Haven, and know I'm talking to you. Not some television crowd, but the single soul tucked behind that glowing screen, maybe sipping cold coffee, maybe wondering if endings ever truly tidy themselves. I'll tell you plain, love, whether it's the thunderbolt kind that hopped a troop, train, or the quiet drip of forgiveness that waters a dry route doesn't vanish when the clock strikes grief. It reshapes, like river water finding a fresh channel, and sometimes it circles back wearing new boots you almost don't recognize. Why? Even now, some nights when the hallway quiet is thick as library dust, I hear the soft jingle of Daniel's tag beneath the lilac bush and could swear he's marching one more round to make sure my Coco's safe. Maybe that's wishful thinking, or maybe love, once planted, keeps its own watch. Who's to say? What I do know is this: the past gave me scars and a compass, and the compass needle still jiggles every time I choose tenderness over fear, truth over hush, Coco over bitterness. So, if anything in my rambling has lit a glow inside you, promise me you'll carry that spark outside your earbuds and set it someplace useful, maybe in a comment below where another weary traveler can warm their hands, or in a phone call you've been putting off because apologies feel awkward. Darling, the world's throat is dry for lack of honest voices, and yours might be the next sip. And now, before I click this Sony quiet, let me leave one last pebble in your shoe, the kind that nudges with every step till you set words to screen. Do you believe that true love is obliged to return, or can it fulfill its promise simply by changing us once and then walking on? Mull it over, tap out your answer if you've got the sand, and don't be shy if the truth pinches a little. Growth wears new shoes, after all. As for me, I'll sit a spell longer watching moonlight stripe the floor, listening to distant freight trains usher wheat dreams across Kansas, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch a drift of lilac and could almost swear he still remembers.